welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So I feel lucky because I get to sit here from the comfort of my studio and talk to really, really intelligent people. And I get to share that with you, which is even better. And so joining us today is someone I've had on before, and his name is Dr. Charles Nenner. And he's got a very interesting background. So he's actually a medical doctor that went into psychology, and then he went into the stock market. And his big thing is understanding cycles. Very similar to Martin Armstrong. He's in that class of people that are considered very, some almost legendary cycles analysts. And so what he does, and he's going to explain more of it in this interview, is looks at cycles, look back in history and see the cycles, the patterns that develop. And once you start seeing these cycles and patterns, it's easier to understand where we're at in these cycles and patterns, but also what comes next. And so, a few different areas that he's focused on really have been financial and war, similar to Martin Armstrong in understanding, and they're very tied. And so today we're going to be looking at the financial cycles that he's seeing, what that tells him about the stock market, Dow Jones, et cetera, what that also shows about where the interest rates are at, because as we can see right now with the interest rates where they are, it's really hurting a lot of Americans. And actually what he says is he seems actually quite certain that interest rates are going to double digits. But then we're also going to be talking about the cycles of war and also, again, what he's seeing as coming next with Ukraine-Russia war. And what he sees is not it pittering out until it stops. Unfortunately, he sees an escalation until things get kind of bad. So anyway, folks, please enjoy this interview with Dr. Charles Nenner. Dr. Nenner, it's so great to have you back on. Thanks for being here with us today.
Welcome. There's a lot to talk about.
There is. So you've done the show before, but why don't you give us just a really quick background on yourself and maybe just a quick explanation of what financial cycles are and what cycles are in general and how those can be used to understand war, economy, et cetera, because I think that's a really important, both points are very important for the audience to understand before we get digging into the details here today.
Okay, so I'm a medical doctor and I did surgery, which was too difficult to me. So I changed to psychiatry. At least you have a chair, you can sit down, it's much better. So then I joined a worldwide program that wanted to know if people become psychotic all over the world at the same time. What leads to it? And we found out that they do it at the same time. And then we found what I call as a cycle. Now, what is a cycle is actually comes from the Greek words. A cycle means that every so many months, every so many years, every so many days, you change direction. So after that, I saw a program in New York on television, CNBC. They said the market goes up, the market goes down. I said, that sounds strange. I'm going to check this out. So that was the beginning of the 80s. There were no computers, so I did it by hand. And then I joined Merrill Lynch. Just says, listen, I was a bit strange, medical doctor. Then went very well. And then I started my own company and joined Goldman Sachs for many years, and it became a whole career. Now, it's based on the fact that cycles and in financial markets, price targets are predictable. And I will give you an example. Let's say we buy IBM, and we buy IBM at 100 and it goes to 150. And IBM comes out with great numbers, so it goes up, you would think. Well, it goes up if the cycle is up, and then the Wall Street Journal will write, people poured into IBM because they're doing great. But what if the cycle is down and the numbers are still great? So now IBM goes down. So what's the Wall Street Journal going to write about this as well? People took advantage and they don't think the number's going to be better next year, so they took profit. Which means is that even if you know the facts, which most of the time we don't, the interpretation of the facts is overruling the facts. So for instance, I showed you an interesting yearly cycle on interest rates. The interest rate is a big problem these days. Now, this is the research I did. Interest rate, you see, it starts at the beginning in 1700. It was a lot of work, and this is a yearly cycle, which means is that from top to top, and the cycle is in red, and the interest rates are in black. It's shocking for people that are born just, after after this happened, that interest rates almost went to 20%. So from top to top to top, it's the same amount of years as from bottom to bottom to bottom. Now, what you see is that in 2000, the cycle started to bottom. Now in 2023, and we have an acceleration to the upside, which means is the interest rates go up, and they go up for the next, I'll say, till 2040 or so. Now, if you think anything can happen in the world, then you cannot predict anything. The slogan says predicting is very hard, especially concerning the future. Maybe you know that one. It's not mine. I think it's by Freud, but it's still valid. If you say, I don't know what's going to happen, just there seems to be a natural order in the world that works, and we see later what the reasons are for something to happen, then it's very profitable, especially in financial markets, also in medicine, in climate. We can use it anywhere. And then whatever happens, we'll see why interest rates continue up. There's one more that I want to show, and that is a cycle that we did on the Dow Jones. That's not a yearly cycle. That says a daily cycle. You see it on the bottom. So what you see is the cycle topped, 2 months ago, and it's now down for a while. So you can say, when I was at the top, I don't know why it should go down. Now we know there's a problem with the government, with the budget, whatever. That's probably not the real reason why it goes down. It goes down because the natural order of nature says that there is a cycle top, and now the Dow Jones goes down. And then all kinds of bad things can happen. So it's against human nature to think like that. But a lot of professionals think like that these days. And it's worthwhile to know how they approach markets instead of listening to stories that come after the fact and you can't do anything anymore. So that's my work, has been for many years. So it's not only that we know when something happens, because maybe you remember when you were in school, they used to teach you if you shoot a bullet in the air, how high it can go with the momentum until it turns down, how far it goes. It's the same thing with the financial market, which means is if IBM goes up with a certain momentum, you can calculate how high it goes. And the funny thing is, once it hits the target on the top, something's going to give way and it's coming down. And everybody's, oh, now it was coming down, because you don't know how to calculate the price target. So my work is, if something happens, we know when it happens. And if a move starts going up and down, we know what the next price target is.
And so in a lot of ways, it's finding patterns. I've interviewed Martin Armstrong a handful of times, and he's talked about,
right.
The research he's done, and that every, say, this many years, a war happens. Every this many years,
right.
Something happens, which, to me, if you go back into the idea that we're not just some random group of cells flying in the universe, and that there is a creative and an intelligent design behind us, that there be patterns right within that design. And so
I was a Fox channel years ago, and I said the second decade of a new century leads to a war. So that's what we have now. 100 years ago, we had the First World War. Before that, we had Napoleon. Before that, so it's very interesting. People want to check it. You just put on Google major wars around the change of the century, and it goes back for thousands of years. Now, the problem is, I remember when I was at Goldman Sachs, we had Abby Cohen at that time. She was head of The Economist. And if they don't understand it, they don't accept it. I'm a medical doctor. If I can help you become better by getting you the red pill, I don't care if I understand it, I give you the red pill. So it's much more practical what we do than economists who, have all these things and in the end, they say, you know what, we're right, the market is irrational. That doesn't happen. Everybody's losing a shirt because the research is wrong. So that's why it's practical to have a medical doctor looking at financial markets.
Interesting point. And so I want to bring up the graphic, for instance, again, of the Dow Jones. So the blue line on top represents the actual the number of the Dow Jones, right? Showing it's bouncing,
right.
And this from 2020 down to 18,000 roughly up to say 30, 35, 36,000. Now, what is the red line below, and
So
how did you generate
the
that
red line is
line?
the red line is a cycle. So you see, it hit the high in when was it in the first high? What was it? 2020? I don't remember. And then it came down into the low, which you see 1124 somewhere there on the bottom, and then it went up again until it topped months ago, and now it's down again. Now you can come up with all kinds of reasons why it happened, but that doesn't really help the investor. What, according to me, the investor wants to know is what's going to happen. Forget about why it happens. But the problem is a lot of people don't want doubt. They want to know why it happens, and they're not worried about, being practical and just accept that you don't know why it happens. Just you want to know what happens. Now, for instance, you know that I cannot come up with this book, The Black Swan Theory. You know the Black Swan Theory? So the
Yes.
Black Swan Theory says that there are going to be major occurrences in financial markets which impossible to predict what leads to it. So the big discussion is everybody tries to figure out what is the next one, what can happen. I don't try to figure out what can happen. I just want to know when it happens. But nobody seems to be busy when it happens. They all want to know what will lead to it. So it's a total different approach, which is much more practical. I think the assumption is you don't know when it's going to happen. So let's talk about why it's going to happen. What we proved for 20, 30 years that you know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and we don't deal with why it's going to happen.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And so let's touch upon the stock market, for instance. I recently did a show on the housing market, and I recently sold a house. So I've been tracking what's happening, and it's not looking good for the housing market for a lot of reasons. And if you look at the charts, they're all pretty scary looking. So what do you with the data that you're seeing? I mean, I think last time I interviewed you, I think it was earlier this year, you talked about seeing a 30 to 40% drop in the stock market by fall of this year, right? Fall, heading into the winter, which tends to be the time when that happens, in the overall cycle. What are you, now that we're entering, at the end of September, entering into October, what are you seeing? What do you think is coming next, say over the next 6 months or so with stock
Well,
market?
first of all, the housing markets seem still okay until the middle of next year, the cycle. What you have to watch very carefully is stocks like Toll Brothers and Lennar Brothers. If you look at what happened to those stocks, 2005, 2006, they were already cut in half before the housing came down. So if you watch those stocks, then you have a prediction what's going to happen to the real housing market. Now, there was a little shift in cycles, so I'm not sure that I'm holding the 30% right now. It's going lower, but then it hangs around for a while. So we're going. It's a bad situation. It's a bad situation. The economy is going to be in a recession. Now, you will hear people say there's going to be 30% chance of recession, 50% of recession. I tell you a secret. There is an inverted yield curve, which means is that if you take the yield curve, what these investors do is the 2-year yield or the 2-year rate is higher than a 10-year rate. That's called an inverted yield curve. Now, if it goes back to normal, that means is the 10-year gives you a better rate than a 2-year, you go back to zero or better. Now, if you have data and you go back like 50, 60 years, you can see that in 100% of the cases, there was a recession once we go back to normal. And all these people say we have a chance for 30, 40, 50%, don't do their homework. Because, of course, one day we're going back to normal. And that's when the recession starts. Now, when the recession starts is when corporate profits are going down, and then the market takes a dive. But it's 100% correlation for the last 50, 60 years. Take my word for it. If people want to take a look at my website, it's all there. So we're going into recession the moment that the yield curve changes direction and is going up above above zero.
And when do you think that might happen? That change?
I tell you honestly, it's not going to happen for a while. It's interesting. It's not going to happen for a while. I tell you, I don't have that ready because we're busy with doing so many markets. For the moment, it's not important. It's not going to happen. In our next interview, I'll prepare it and I can answer your question.
There we go. And what about, so your other chart, which I'll bring back up here, is going to interest rates, which, in tracking. Now, this is maybe a very basic question, but when it says bonds, what is the correlation between interest rates and bonds? Just
Well, these are interest rates, and if bonds go down, interest rates go up. So this is not the bonds; this are the interest rates.
Okay.
And that's a good question because actually it's not clear on this chart, but it means this is actually the rates of the 30-year bonds.
I see. Okay. And so, right now where interest rates are at, and everyone's very focused on interest rates right now, obviously because they're on their way back up, and as the meetings come up with the Fed, everyone's kind of nervous and okay, they're going to raise, they're going to pause. So with what you're seeing here, following this and following the cycles, what do you expect to see? I mean, do you think that we could potentially even hit double-digit interest rates within the next couple of years?
Yes. I've been saying that we can even go back to the highs.
Really? So you think
which
we
is
could
a
even
big
go close to 15%?
Right. So also inflation is not a free choice because we know how inflation starts. It starts a little bit and then salaries goes up and people, they buy or they don't buy, and it's always the same psychology. So once inflation starts, you can say, hooray, it's down now from 7% to 5%. But the momentum that got it from, what was it, 1% to 7%. I mean, we have been like 15, 16% where I come from in Amsterdam, in Holland, was it 16, 70%, 17%. So this momentum is going to continue even if it's going to be a bit lower for a couple of months. So the same thing is with the interest rates. Of course, they're not going sky high within the next 30 years. They're going up and down. So it doesn't mean they cannot come to an agreement in the government and rates go a little bit lower, but something else is going to come up and rates are going up. It could be crude oil, could be a war. We don't know, but we don't deal with why. We just want to be ready to know, if interest rates go up and down. And that, you're right. I also sold my house in Amsterdam, and it's time to reconsider that.
And so, with the interest rates continuing and seeing how interest rates affect the overall economy and especially people's spending and whatnot, a lot of the research I've done lately looking at what's happening here in America, we're reaching record levels of defaults, for instance, on credit cards, on their auto loans, et cetera, which the rates are really hurting people, but also looking at the savings versus debt that's here in America. It's inverted greatly. I mean, obviously during the beginning of COVID, we had the injections of money coming in from the stimulus, et cetera. But now it's actually the consumer debt is skyrocketing, and their savings just keep dropping and dropping and dropping. And so if the interest rates continue to go up, and now we're hitting 10, 12, 13, 15%, how do you think that's going to influence the consumer? Because right now, a lot of people can't even afford a house anymore because of the interest rates where they're at, and we're still in single digits.
Remember what I said about IBM. If the cycles are up, you can have the news, it's bad, nobody cares. Once a cycle turned down, the news is still bad, but now everybody gets worried because psychology has changed. Now, you might ask me why that is. I want to make it short. It becomes a bit more complicated. It's based on my study on sunspots. Sunspots is the intensity of the sun. And NASA, for instance, has a forecast weekly what the sunspots intensity is. Now, the sunspot intensity leads to an electromagnetic field down here. And the electromagnetic field in the world has to do with the crystallization of water. There are different kinds of crystallization of water. Even more interesting, there are pictures of water when you curse and when you pray. Maybe you've seen it under the microscope, and it changes the crystallization. Now, our brain is 70, 80% water, which means is the crystallization of water influences the situation in our brain. So this is what cycles are based on. It doesn't come out of the blue. It has a physical component. So once that electromagnetic field changes and the cycle changes, then it doesn't mean that the news get worse. The news get even better, but now everything is interpreted on a negative level. And then the consumer and everybody says, wow, we're in trouble. So that's coming close already. So again, the reality is not always the problem. The interpretation of the reality is a problem. For instance, I'm very worried about the war situation, very worried. And it seems like nothing is going on. Nobody seems to be worried. We have a pact that seems to be growing. And we've seen that in all the big wars. I would say Korea, China, Russia, Iran, against the United States by themselves or the West. And nobody seems to be worried. It's just outrageous. And once cycles turn in a certain way, then everybody will be totally worried about it. Who knows what happens to inflation, crude oil and prices, or whatever. You have to be prepared.
And so let's touch on war, because that is something. It's what's interesting. Actually, I can comment on this because, as someone in my position, I'm putting out 4 or 5 shows every week, and I'm following the topics. And part of what I'm trying to understand is the ebb and flow of what people are interested in, because I try to find it's a crossover. As I try to find information and guests I think that are important, but also I need to be aware of what people are interested in, right? And so it's that blend of not only be carrying out what everyone's interested in, but also kind of putting it together. And so I find that there's just certain times with the war, for instance, that people are much more interested in the war, and for whatever reason. But then there's other times when no one seems to care about it. And one show,
Right.
if an interview is done on the war at the peak interest time, it'll get 3 times the amount of views than at the low interest time, even though the same situation is happening in the war. And so I observed that, these cycles, from where I'm standing too, which is also interesting. And so, as you mentioned, that no one really cares about the war right now, but doesn't mean that it's over or it's not going to get worse.
Well, that's the first. I answer you in a second, but this is so interesting with financial markets because people invest based on what they read on television. And if the gold price will go up for months, then they pick it up, but that's at the high because the people who know what's going on bought already at the bottom. So they need the stupid public now to take it out of their hands. That's always the same play. I remember my father says, how's it possible? You're always on the wrong side because you listen to the media only pick it up after it happens for a while. So after war happens for a while, they pick it up. Now, I'm Dutch, so I don't want, I'm just neutral, okay? Just give you some facts. United States has been involved in, I think, almost 20 wars after the Second World War. They all more or less lost it. They had, the NATO was 17 countries. Now it's, I think, 33 countries. They broke every promise they had with Russia. They expanded the NATO everywhere. And the only thing that Russia wanted is don't put the rockets next to our border. Now, Americans know that problem because you know what Kennedy did. They didn't put the border, they put it in Cuba, and he risked already a third world war. So what would the United States do if Russia would put in Mexico? They wouldn't allow that. They wouldn't come up with the same thing. Well, Mexico is allowed to do whatever they want. So they're really pushing it, and the West is putting so much weaponry in there. Now they have low-risk nuclear arms they're going to give them. Russia is never going to lose this war.
Hey, folks, I've got a quick message for you. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of people, myself included, talking about the importance of buying precious metals, gold and silver. But what's really behind that? Is just a thing of, hey, buy this gold, buy this silver, right? Or is there something deeper that we should be looking at? So I recently came across some figures about house prices. So in 1930, the average family home was approximately $4,000. Fast forward to 2023, the average family home is just over $400,000. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because things have just gotten more expensive? No, it's actually because the dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1930, right? When people talk about the collapse of the dollar or inflation, this is what it means. Now, let's take a look at gold. So in 1930, if you wanted to purchase your home in gold, it would take approximately 200 gold coins. So 200 gold coins would purchase the average family home in 1930, about $4,000. Now, if you, instead of buying a home with that gold or cash, you set those aside, if you set aside $4,000 in cash in 1930, it would be worth $4,000 today. What can you buy with $4,000? Can you buy a family home? No, you can't even buy a crappy used car. But if you set aside $4,000 worth of gold coins in 1930, which is 200 gold coins, 1 ounce coins, that would be worth approximately $400,000 today. And this is the key lesson about precious metals. It's not about getting rich. It's about putting your money into an asset that protects you against inflation and against the destruction of the currency, which is what happens to all fiat currencies, especially now we're in the end days of the dollar. And so that's why it's important, maybe not all of your money, but a portion of your money, a portion of what you have. I highly recommend putting it into precious metals of gold and silver, because what it's doing is it's protecting you. This is an asset that has stood the test of time, not just stood the test of time since the 1930s. We're talking about the rise and fall of civilizations. Gold was used to buy houses back in ancient Rome. It's still around. It's an asset that will forever have its value. So folks, if you want to do this and you need someone you can trust, there's no person I can recommend more than Dr. Kirk Elliott. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a strong Christian patriot, and he's out to really help people to protect their savings and what you've worked for against the destruction of the dollar, not to mention also protecting it against the dangers of central bank digital currencies. So to learn more about this, go to goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 720-605-3900. Both those places will allow you to set up a quick appointment where you can talk to a wealth advisor that will help get you started on this path. Again, goldwithseth.com, 720-605-3900.
So what would the United States do if Russia would put in Mexico? They wouldn't allow that. They wouldn't come up with the same thing. Well, Mexico is allowed to do whatever they want. So they're really pushing it, and the West is putting so much weaponry in there. Now they have low-risk nuclear arms they're going to give them. Russia is never going to lose this war. They have to understand that they cannot lose this war because they don't want the West to be close to their border. It's irresponsible. Now, there is what's called the Monroe Doctrine. I don't know if you know about it. It's about 30, 40 years old. That means is we against Russia, and we're going to defeat Russia. Russia is not the problem. Russia wanted to be part of Europe. China is the problem, being started for many years. And if the Americans say, we're going to defend Taiwan, what, you're going to bring the whole fleet to Taiwan in there in time? And what if on the back, Iran is going to attack you, Korea is going to attack you? I mean, it's total. I don't know who's ruling this place. I don't know who's in charge. And there's nobody to talk to. You don't hear another voice. You have the same thing with the climate. There are cycles in the climate, global warming and not global warming. Well, maybe you should look into cycles. I'm not saying anything because you get canceled if you say something that people don't like. But I have a lot to say about the climate, and nobody does his work. There have been 3, 4 studies and 100 studies against it, but people are afraid to speak up. So, the farmers in Holland and wherever are getting killed because we have to do the climate. And I don't see any facts. It's just, I can talk about, let's look at the cycles. Maybe it's a normal behavior. Nobody looks a little bit further, like in the financial markets, like in politics and wars. And I'm very worried about what's going on. Very worried. We're on the brink of a big catastrophe. And what you say is, I don't know why nobody is worried about it.
Exactly. And so I know that so we mentioned earlier talking about the cycles of wars and looking at what happens. And so in the same way that you can look at the Dow, or you can look at the interest rates, and you can see that based upon the cycles, it shows you what comes. And it's historically proven to be very true and accurate. What are you seeing in terms of war? What are you seeing in terms of the next couple of years do you think that Russia, Ukraine, which has really turned into, United States and NATO versus, in many ways, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, et cetera, it's a much bigger thing that's unfolding. do you see it continuing and getting worse and worse until there's
It's
a global war?
The cycles are accelerating. And the most stupid thing I heard, I think Biden say or somebody else as well, we're dealing with a nuclear Korea, it's under control. We do the same thing with Iran. The difference is Koreans don't want to die. Iranians don't want to be martyrs. They don't mind dying. There is no historical understanding in the United States like it is in Europe. So I don't know what they're thinking. I just don't think that the West doesn't have much chance if they cooperate these countries that we talk about, because we are a bit spoiled, right? There's this movie, I think it was Annie Hall, maybe remember, from Woody Allen. And Woody Allen went to a movie with Keaton, and they, like, Woody Allen always liked to see a movie about Nazis. And they came out of the theater, and she says, I wonder what I would do under stress if the Nazis caught me. And then he says, you ready to give up when they take away your credit card? I don't know if you remember that said. Yes. So this generation, has no clue. I'm born in Amsterdam just after the Second World War. It was very tough. There was nothing there. Everything was bombarded, no housing, no nothing. And I know how to survive. But the children and grandchildren of my friends, you take away the credit card, they give up. So the West can never compete with all these countries, and we're becoming too weak. So I don't know where anybody's paying attention. Keep a bit low key. Don't try to expand the West more. We have enough. Don't we have enough allies? We have to get to Ukraine also. What else do you want? But I'm not in charge, and thank God I'm not in charge.
And so I know that in the discussion I've had with you in the past and some other interviews you've done, you've talked about how what your research and data is showing is that there will be a pretty significant die-off of people in the world. I think that, roughly 1/3 or 35% over a certain period of time. So can you touch on that and just, explain where your data is at on that right now?
So let me explain to you. Now we're not talking about cycles, we're talking about momentum. Right? So we talked about IBM goes up $30, goes down $10, goes up $50, goes down. And in the end, where the top is. So if you take all the wars, and let's say you make a chart of financial markets, on the bottom you have the dates, on the left you have the price, then you can calculate how high the price goes. So it's very insensitive to say that, but if you change the price into the amount of people, you know where you're going to get. Now, it's interesting. It was interesting when I said that, also in your program, I got support from the Christian view. It seems to be the Christian view that before the Messiah comes back, like they say, 1/3 of the people are going to die. So, well, that's interesting. That's not what I base it on. So we know that every war has more casualties. And so there is a way of knowing how high IBM goes and how high the casualty is going to be. So that, to my regret, is going to be a very high number.
All right, folks, I've got a quick message for you. I have one simple question. If today you could no longer go purchase more food for your family, with the food stores that you have in your home, how long would you be able to feed your family? Would it be a week, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, a year? This is a really important question, folks, that we have to be very realistic about, because the elites are proactively trying to put us into a state of food crisis and a state of famine. I'm sure you've seen all of the different food processing plants and farms that are blowing up. You've got cattle dying by the tens of thousands. They're proactively trying to collapse our food system because they know if they can control our food, they can control us. And so one of the best ways to be outside of their control is to be able to have our own stores of food and to be able to produce our own food. So there's really two things I would recommend. One is having heirloom seeds that you can grow your own food with, making sure that they're non-GMO heirloom seeds, that way you can harvest your seeds this year, use them next year. You can use these seeds for generations. Literally, that's how it will work. The other thing, though, is this high quality storable food. This is food that's sitting somewhere, it's hidden in your basement, buried in your backyard, whatever it is. So that way, if there is a crisis, if there is an emergency, you might have 3 months set aside to get through that time period. And so for this, I would highly recommend a company called Heaven's Harvest. This is an amazing Christian owned patriot company. And what they're doing is they're making high quality storable food. Again, a lot of the food companies, they say these food buckets, they're all about maximizing calories per dollar. They're filling the buckets with a bunch of filler and junk like sweet beverages, etc. But Heaven's Harvest, they focus on very high quality food that will last up to 25 years on the shelf. They also sell heirloom seeds. So you can buy all of your seeds, you can buy all of your storable food. And look, folks, personally, I would recommend having at least 3 months per person in your household, if not 6 months or even a year. Again, depends on your budget, but I would definitely make sure you have some seeds because those seeds could be worth their weight in gold, if not more in the future. So to go ahead and do this right now, go open up a new tab and go to heavensharvest.com. And if you use the promo code Seth, that's SETH, promo code Seth, you'll save 15% off of your entire order. So again, folks, the time is running out and you'd rather be 3 months or 1 year early than 1 day late. Again, heavensharvest.com and use promo code Seth to save 15% today. What timeline are you seeing with that? I mean, is this something over the next 5 years or 10 years, or do you have any idea with what the timeline's looking like?
Well, I would like people still to sleep after they listen to what we say, but you can write down that 2027 is the major situation. And I tell you why 2027 is the major situation. The cycles that led to the crisis and the crash of 1929 for the first time looked exactly the same in 2027. Now, I don't know what's going to lead to the next crash. Could be a war. So if you ask me when, there's a real possibility that that's when it happens.
I see. And so basically what you're seeing overall is that we reached a peak, right? With stock market and other kind of related items, and that we're seeing a drop now. It's going to continue dropping. Nothing too extreme though, but then as you get closer to 2027, that's when a lot of these, whether it's the financial markets, the wars, population, et cetera, that's when you're seeing significant changes, significant downside for all those indicators, right?
Yeah, but it could also be the end result, like they say, wars are the end result of a change in society. So it could be the end result of something that happens already. We'll talk before 27, I'm sure. So I don't say it's going to hold up till 27. As you say, by 27, the whole thing is going to be a terrible situation.
I see. Okay. And where do you think, I mean, looking at America, right, at the center of this, and you mentioned the children without their credit cards. And if you look at the average American person now versus our grandparents or great grandparents, in the Great Depression, they were survivors. They knew how to can their food. They knew how to live off the land. Now, you see these videos of people looting the cities and Philadelphia, or you see people that are so obsessed with gender ideology and everything that it's like if a war comes, the minds of the average person in America, it seems, couldn't be further away from the mindset of how to survive and strengthen your family and whatnot. So amidst these global changes, how do you see America faring?
Well, my wife says don't mention it again. She's right here in the kitchen, so she will kill me. I'm just mentioning it one more time because I think it's important. History repeats itself. And what I've been saying for the last couple of years, when Rome was burning, she still lets me talk, when Rome was burning, the senators sat for months discussing if angels were masculine or feminine. Doesn't it sound familiar what's going on now? Same thing. If you look what brought Rome down, you make a list, it's exactly what brings it down now. I just saw something which is interesting. I don't repeat it exactly. I might forget. It says like, when it came against the Muslims, I said, it's not my business. I'm not I'm not a Muslim. When they came against the Jews, I'm not a Jew. It's none of my business. When they came against the homosexual, none of my business. I don't support them. Now they come against me. There's nobody to help me anymore.
Yeah, I've seen
You
that as
understand?
well. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very clever. And but I have no. I find it amazing. I mean, isn't it? You know, the Marxists that want us to introduce Marxism seem so convinced that Marx made a mistake and then that's going to make that mistake. But it has to be catastrophe all over the world. By the way, is it an outside influence? How does this group suddenly gets there? And what the trick is, if I may say the trick, and again, I'm Dutch, so I don't vote, so don't be angry at me, don't send me emails. Um, Under the disguise of I'm doing something good. So you can't say you're doing something good. I'm pro GTBC, whatever it is. A 6-year-old, I say now it can be a girl or boy. I'm only meaning well. So under the cover of doing meaning well, they do the worst things. And the problem is, how do you deal with people that they say, look, I'm only doing well. If you're doing something bad, you can tell them, but they say, no, I'm doing something well. So it's a very interesting. I listened to Professor Peterson. I don't know if you know Professor Peterson. Okay. He said he made an analysis, and again, I don't send me angry emails. I just say what people say, and I find it interesting. He says, what's the difference between the left and the right? So he says that psychologically they're different, and that's why the left has less patience for verbal expressions. So that's why the left always comes with one slogan. We want this, we want that, we want that. Don't ask me why I want this, which doesn't work with the right. So the very interesting analysis of what's going on right now, the situation is everybody's so afraid to be canceled, we're hopeless.
Exactly. And when free speech is attacked in the way that it is, it's the end of the empire at that stage. It's that serious, because what you can say also dictates what you can think. And if they can control your speech for long enough, they can control what you think. And then they've gained control over how your mind even works. And then it's over.
If I may say to everybody, read George Orwell.
Yes.
He in 1980 he predicted everything. So if we take away statues, we don't remember the history. So the next generation can tell you anything they want because you don't know what's true, what's not true. So this is how you cancel a culture. Now, by society, it's interesting, that average society, they survive like 250 years. So being Dutch, proud, we ruled the world once, 250 years. Then came the Spanish and the Portuguese. Then came the English, 250 years. Now, if you go back to the Civil War, 250 years are over. It's just interesting. I don't say it's going to happen. It's just interesting to collect all this data that every society is breaking down after 250 years.
Exactly.
So there's a lot going on. And, people will say, what can we do? Because people come to me and says, listen, if the cycles, you can't do anything. So I says, let's say you have a cycle. There's a summer, there's a winter, there's a summer, there's a winter, you're right. But if you know the cycle, you can buy a winter coat. So whatever people can do for themselves, I mean, we're not going to stop this because it's based on cycles. It's just interesting to see how it develops. Because you see, there was a German writer called Goethe. And he wrote in German, man sieht, was man weiß, which means in English, you see what you know. And he meant that if we walk together to a garden, and you know a lot about flowers, you see those flowers. If I have no clue, I don't see those flowers. So once we know what we're looking for, it's just interesting to see how it develops because you see much more. And the same thing in financial markets. If you know what's going to happen, it's interesting to listen to so-called experts, how they're going to explain later, which you knew already in advance. So if I just may say, and I really don't have a good business, you can sign up 30 days for free on our website and just see how we do it. It's for free 30 days. You don't have to subscribe later. Just see what the possibilities are. On one side, you have the big firms. On the other side, you have the so-called experts on television that you're following, and it usually doesn't go well. And see where the discrepancy is. Just take a look what is possible in financial markets instead of listening to stories why this goes up, why this goes down. But Doesn't make sense. Especially now when times are so critical. Just take a look. 30 days, not going to cost you anything. You don't have to continue. Just have an idea, and then you see much more. Like you see the flowers. Now you know the flowers, so you see the flowers.
Which is, and I think this is important, and it's interesting because I never set out to be covering financial news, but the more I've learned through, especially through doing this process of speaking to so many really intelligent people like yourself, is that it's all connected. And if you understand what's happening with war, it's tied to the economics, and economics is tied to food, and food is tied to population, and population is tied to, geopolitics and policy. I mean, it's all together. So all
well, for instance, if the crude price goes up, the Russians have much more money to have a war than if the crude goes down.
Exactly.
As an example.
Exactly.
So it's all connected. Yeah. You're right.
It is. So your website is just charlesnenner.com. I'll put that into the description. So that's the best place for people to follow what you do and to get the free trial to see exactly how what you're thinking and in your approach applies to the stock market, and a lot of the other financial vehicles. Is that right?
Yes. And we also have the track record. Again, I'm not selling anything, just in case you don't believe it. Look at the track record every year, every month with the track record. You've never seen something like that. So it seems to work.
Great. Well, Dr. Nenner, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I feel so lucky to be able to sit down with people like you and just ask these questions, because it's so far outside of my realm of understanding, but it's really, I think it's an important topic for us to understand. And I thank you for taking the time to educate us.
You're welcome. And I hope people can still sleep after they listen to us, because, times are dangerous.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, take care. It's very nice to have you on. Thank you.